the municipal calendar, there are other events popping up. So there are sort of mini concerts happening at the various pianos around the community, as well as some pop-up performances from opera singers that are happening at some of the public art pieces. And so those schedules are changing and they're being added to our calendar. So if you're interested in some of the little events and happenings around town, those are happening. Also want to just remind that we have a public hearing coming up this Thursday for 1391 Oliver Street. And then finally, that following that, there's just one more committee of the whole and council meeting happening next Monday, and then we're taking a much-needed break over parts of the balance of the summer. So certainly look forward to this meeting tonight and to that meeting next week. Next up is public comment and question period. We have, I think, 2 people who had indicated they wish to join us this evening. So I'm going to call, there was a Ms. McNamara. Are they here in person? They're here in okay, yes. Perfect. Hello, and so our process here is just, if you just give your name and municipality of residence, then we have 3 minutes to address council on matters related to the district. And yes, welcome to our very warm chambers tonight. Yes. Oh, you have to turn on the microphone in front of you, just to hit the middle button.
Great, can you hear me? Yeah. Thank you. Thank you. My name is Carmen McNamara, and I live in the city of Victoria. So good evening, Mayor Murdoch and council, and thank you for allowing me to address you this evening. I am the founder of Help Ukraine Vancouver Island, and we work with Ukrainian organizations across the island to find housing, jobs, and community for Ukrainian refugees. I am here to ask that you open the second of 2 vacant homes owned by the District of Oak Bay for Ukrainian refugees here on the island. As I'm sure you are aware, the war in Ukraine has left hundreds of thousands of Ukrainians to apply to live in Canada. At last count, over 300,000 applications had been received, and 55,000 Ukrainian refugees have arrived in Canada in the past 6 months. To put that in context, 16,000 Afghan refugees have arrived in the past 12 months, meaning that we are seeing nearly 7 times the number of Ukrainian refugees as Afghans. In that time, 311 Ukrainians that we are aware of have arrived on the island, including 12 families, approximately 35 people here in the District of Oak Bay. We currently have 1,315 people on our waiting list. Our program prioritizes the most vulnerable, meaning that most of the families that we settle consist of single mothers with children. Last week, I got a call from a mother in crisis. She had arrived a few days before with no plan for where she was going to stay, having not contacted us. She met a friendly stranger at the airport who offered her shelter and a job, and she went with him along with her 2 children. That friendly stranger turned out to be a human trafficker. Somehow, this young mother escaped. She got my number, and she is now safely resettled. The fact is that these people are coming whether or not we are ready for them. We have approximately 12 remaining host families available to take in refugees, which means that at the moment we have 12 host families for 1,300 people who are trying to come here. Island families have generously opened their homes, but the reality is that we need a lot more assistance. Council has previously responded that they will make the smaller 2-bedroom house available once some repairs are done, and for that we are grateful. I ask that you please also open the larger home to accommodate women with their children. I understand that a proposal has been submitted by the Intercultural Association with support from Greater Victoria Housing Society, the Community Association of Oak Bay, and with the approval of local neighbors. As a representative of Help Ukraine Vancouver Island, I would like to add my voice to the supporters of this proposal and urge Council to make both homes available as soon as reasonably possible. You have an opportunity here to make a major difference in the lives of some vulnerable people, and I ask that you please help us to help them. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. McNamara. I can share with you today, so we have, we can do a rise report that we've approved entering lease negotiations on the one house. The second house I can't speak to just yet in terms of public comments, but that is the current case. So thank you.
Thank you.
And the next speaker I think we have is Devin Goldie. Thank you very much. Welcome. You probably heard the process. If you just state your name and municipality of residence, your 3 minutes will kick off. Welcome.
Thank you. My name is Devin Sarita Goldie. I'm a resident of Saanich. It's lovely to see you all. Thank you so much for giving us the opportunity to speak. I am the president of the Ukrainian Cultural Center, the president of the Ukrainian Canadian Congress Victoria branch, and a co-founder of Help Ukraine Vancouver Island, along with Carmen, who you just heard from. And I just also like to speak and ask that you consider granting the second house for the temporary residence of Ukrainian refugees. As you may know, the Canadian government has chosen not to make Ukrainians refugees in the traditional sense. They are displaced persons, which in some ways has made it easier for them to come to Canada, but in other ways has made it very difficult because they don't have access to the same resources that most refugees do. And the biggest piece of that puzzle is access to a system that helps them find housing. And housing has become our #1 crisis. As you all know, housing is a crisis already, and with the 1,300 refugees that we have wanting to come to Victoria, and to Vancouver Island, and many of whom have already booked tickets and are planning to come and have nowhere to stay, housing is a huge, huge challenge for us right now. Ukrainians are able to get jobs and they are able to pay for rent, but the things that they're not able to find are actual homes. So I would like to ask very respectfully that you consider granting the second house to be used by Ukrainians as well. We have been very, very grateful to the districts for the support that you've provided so far, and to the province and the wonderful Ukrainians and Canadians who have stepped up to help. So I'd like to lend my support to this motion as well.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. And thanks for all the work that you're doing. And I believe we have one more speaker this evening. Nope, that's it. Is there anybody who is online? This is a chance. If you're in the Zoom application, you can use the reactions tab at the bottom to raise your hand. That you indicate you wish to speak, or if you've called into the 1855 number, you can hit *9. That is *9, not #9. We've had that confusion before. *9 to raise your hand, and you'll show up within our app here as well. So, is there anybody who wishes to address council this evening? This is not on items on the agenda. This is for matters that are not on the agenda, but are of general interest to the community. I don't see them, so I'm going to come back then and conclude the public comment and question period. And as I do that, I just want to thank the two speakers. The urgency and the incredible crisis that is happening in Ukraine, I think we all share a need for doing everything we can to support. And I just, the people like our speakers who are doing so much to help, they shouldn't go unrecognized or unthanked, because their work is incredibly important, and certainly we hear that urgency at this table. Moving on to item number 7, or section 7, and item 7.1. The next 3 items are not subject to public input, as we've dealt with them with the public input at the Committee of the Whole. These are generally recommendations that the Committee of the Whole, which is council sitting as a committee, make to ourselves. So we're going to go through these. I would just suggest, if there's anything in section 8 that you're wanting to speak to, this is a good time to call into the 1855 number and be ready to hit *9 to raise your hand as we get to those items. So item number 7.1 is the pickleball court sound mitigation options. There's a recommendation here from Committee of the Whole. Does anybody wish to move that recommendation? Moved and seconded. Thank you. Any discussion, further discussion on that matter? do not see any hands popping up, so I'll call the question. All those in favor? Any opposed? None opposed. That carries. 11.2. Similarly, recommendations from the June 20th Committee of the Whole. And 7.2. Moved and seconded. Thank you. Any further discussion on that motion? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Any opposed? None opposed. And then moving on to item number 7.3. This is the McNeill Avenue traffic calming. I think we should get a motion as laid out, moved and seconded. Thank you. Any other discussion? Go ahead, Councillor Patterson.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. I just would like to inform Council that there was discussion about this at the APC. And of course, they get this secondhand. It wasn't because anything they get is really building applications. And this was transportation issues, so it didn't go before them. But there was a great interest, and I would like to move that Council also refer the detailed design to the APC for their review and input prior to its return to Council.
So your motion is to amend this motion here that, because I have all things here, that as a staff share a detailed design with the community and the Advisory Planning Commission, add those words, moved and seconded. So now we have a motion to amend on the floor. Any other discussion on that motion to amend?
Second.
Yeah, it's moved and seconded.
Oh, thank you.
Don't see any other discussion, so I'm going to call the question. All those in favor? Any opposed? None opposed, so that will include that language for the referral. Thank you. Any other discussion on the motion that's in front of us? I have a motion arising, but I think I'll deal with it separately, and it's a fairly minor add-on, but not to confuse the main motion. So with that, I'm ready to, just for my clarification here, Mr. Coates, I'll go to you in this room if there's any, I'm not sure if you could refer it. The motion that was raised in the main part of the agenda package spoke to including a raised sidewalk in the Foul Bay to Victoria. I think I was meant to say crosswalk, is that correct?
I believe that's correct, Mayor,
Okay.
yes.
Okay, so just with that correct wording on there. Oh, does it? It's been caught in that? Okay, good. So thank you. And any other discussion on this before I call the question? I will call the question then. All those in favor? Any opposed? None opposed? And I don't usually make motions, but I'm just going to, I guess, awkwardly motivate and ask if someone would make a motion if they're interested. I think there's a validity in adding that staff include options for widening sections of the road between Foul Bay and Victoria, looking at additional parking and or sidewalk widening for multi-use. And the rationale I had on this one is just, I think, in our looking at the design, there was no way to widen the whole road with the hydro poles and other aspects. But there may be some opportunities of providing some little bump outs for parking, or maybe for making a multipath as part of it, if that works. And I just thought it would be worthwhile to include that as options to explore, not to dictate it. Go ahead, Councillor Braithwaite.
I'm sorry, could you just repeat the area that you thought that, or the
Sure. So this is the section of the road of McNeill between Foul Bay and Victoria. So the westernmost point, the tight point.
So I'd be willing to make that motion.
I'll second that.
Thank you. Is there any other discussion? I'm happy to go ahead, Councillor Appleton.
Thank you, Worship, and I guess I would agree with that, with the motion rising in principle. I guess overall, I heard very clearly from the residents in that section that the overall widening of the road was a concern to them to speed up, that it would potentially speed up traffic. So, is the intent of the motion to look for additional space outside of the current driving area, and not proposing an overall widening of the street surface? Do I get that correct?
Thank you for the opportunity to clarify, Councillor Appleton. Yes, that is correct. I just see there's a couple of places there perhaps on the side that might lose parking, to maybe put a couple of bump ins for a couple of additional pieces of parking. I don't know if it's possible, but I just wanted to give staff the opportunity, because we were pretty clear on that design that was given that there might be some opportunities there. Any other discussion? Go ahead, Councillor Zelka, and then Councillor Green.
Thank you, Chair. Did I hear you say something along the lines of a multi-use trail? And if so, as being part of this motion, what did you mean by that?
Oh, just if there was opportunities to say widen the sidewalk in places, like if there was a way to get some of the traffic. I'm thinking maybe, I don't want to do any traffic engineering at this table. It was just a thought as we talked about some of the constraints on that space, particularly as it approaches Fowl Bay. So it's almost impossible to widen the sidewalk completely because of constraints, but there might be a place there that we might be able to tackle it. So that was the thinking, was just to have a look at that, if there was places to widen the sidewalk to allow multi-use. Is that clear?
Um, uh, so is the word multi-use trail, though those three words as part of this motion? I wasn't quite sure, and if it is, I'm still unclear what you mean by multi-use trail. I understand multi-use, but multi-use trail is something very specific, often out in connecting to remote areas through a forest.
Sure. So the motion is just that staff also, may include options for widening sections of the road between Fowl Bay and Victoria for additional parking, i.e. bump outs or bump ins, and or widening sidewalks for multi-use. So not a multi-use trail, but just widening the sidewalks for multi-use as options.
Thank you.
And Councillor Green?
Yes, thank you. And just to Councillor Appleton's point about feedback from the immediate neighborhood, I think that's, I would just like to reinforce the fact that there will be some consulting done with those most affected. I think it's important that their feedback and options and voices be included. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. And I think that's an incredibly important part of this whole. We're just essentially asking staff to come back with a more detailed design at this point with some potential options. My feeling here is it may be too expensive to look at these things, but I am curious if it makes sense in a couple of places to consider it. So I would appreciate council considering the option here. Any other discussion on this? I'll call the question then. All those in favor? Any opposed? None opposed. Thank you very much for that. Any other items arising on that? Not seeing any. We'll move on then to section 8. This section, as I noted, is subject to public input. So the first item on the agenda is 8.1. I would encourage, if people are interested in speaking to this matter, if you're in the Zoom app, you can raise your hand at any point now, and we'll get to you after. We'll have a presentation, we'll have questions of council, we'll seek public input, and then we'll come back to council for direction. In this case, the recommendation is just to receive the report. And if you're watching on the YouTube stream at home, you can call the 1-855 number, hit the meeting ID and passcode as laid out in the agenda, and then hit *9 to raise your hand, and we'll call on you at that time. So with that, I'm happy to welcome Chief McDonald from our Oak Bay Fire Department to present this report. Welcome, Chief McDonald.
Good evening, Your Worship and members of council. Hoping you're enjoying this fine weather tonight. And as you can see before you on the screen, we've got a presentation for planning for extreme heat events in Oak Bay. Hopefully you've all had the opportunity to review the staff report. And just given the many moving parts in this, might be a little easier if we reserve questions till the end. There's a good opportunity there. And I think if there's some questions that arise. Okay. So the purpose of the report this evening is to provide an overview of the climate projections and the impacts associated with extreme heat, information on the District of Oak Bay actions during a heat emergency, a summary of the communications campaign being undertaken by Oak Bay on extreme heat preparedness, and information on current and future opportunities within the district to improve community-wide resiliency to the impacts of extreme heat. In the summer of 2021, British Columbia experienced several unprecedented extreme heat events when the mean average temperature stayed at record highs for extended periods, and health authorities attributed over 600 deaths province-wide to those events, with 20 of those deaths occurring in southern Vancouver Island. And scientists are unfortunately predicting hotter and drier summers and agree that extreme heat events should be expected and should not be treated as an anomaly. Heat events are classified as a top-down event, and the Oak Bay Emergency Program and the District of Oak Bay follow the actions that during a heat emergency, they follow the lead of the provincial health and emergency authorities. Municipalities, Indigenous nations, and other stakeholders will work with the province and be responsible for developing local plans, which may include public education and information campaigns, new partnerships with local community agencies for heat relief options and monitoring, and regional cooperation to extend limited resources throughout the region. For 2022, a two-tiered BC heat alert response system known as HARS is being used to alert the public of heat risk, being heat warnings and extreme heat emergencies, with the objective of increasing community resilience to extreme heat and develop actions that are most effective in reducing heat-related health risks, especially for those that are most vulnerable. Heat warning criteria for the Environment and Climate Change Canada in British Columbia are separated into 5 different geographical regions, each with different temperature action triggers. And as you can see, Oak Bay resides in the southwest region. Heat warnings will be issued on the WeatherCan app and the ECCC weather alerts page, and anyone can subscribe to be notified of this information directly. Media, regional, and local governments all reinforce this messaging to ensure there's redundancy in how it reaches our residents. And the BC Heat Committee will recommend using the extreme heat emergency alerts through the National Public Wireless Alerting System known as Alert Ready, which is an intrusive alerting system for anyone that has an LTE-based phone. Alert Ready is also used to issue amber alerts and tsunami warnings. And again, media, regional, and local governments all reinforce this messaging to ensure there's redundancy in how it's reaching our residents. And for clarity through the remainder of the presentation, I will refer to an extreme heat event as a triggered event. It should be known that the impacts of last year's extreme heat events were disproportionate across the province. Island Health and British Columbia Emergency Health Services and other emergency service providers in the capital region were less impacted than other areas of the province, such as the Lower Mainland. The Oak Bay Fire Department did not receive an overwhelming number of calls to assist with BC emergency health services, nor were there significant delays in BC EHS responses within Oak Bay. In comparison, the City of Vancouver Fire Department at one point had 100% of their approximately 60 apparatus tied up at medical calls, with significant wait times for BC EHS to arrive. During those periods, there were no resources available for fire or other emergency responses due to the ambulance delays during these periods. The Oak Bay plan is consistent with most local plans within the region, which include drop-in cooling centers during a triggered event and extensive emergency preparedness communications. The exceptions being 2 municipalities which have taken a more comprehensive approach with their responses due to their specific population challenges, including materially and socially disadvantaged people. All local governments and regional agencies are cooperating and promoting their drop-in cooling facilities to anyone in the area in need of temporary cooling relief. The plan also includes emphasis on public education, partnerships with Oak Bay Parks and Recreation, Oak Bay Communications, Oak Bay Police and Block Watch, the Greater Victoria Public Library, and Oak Bay Volunteers, and collaboration with local and regional governments. And the plan will be reviewed annually with internal and external stakeholders. When we experience a triggered event, we'll be looking at providing temporary respite to individuals within the Oak Bay area. And triggered events also open up limited reimbursement options through EMBC. In regards to developing an action plan, we have potential drop-in cooling centers, all with air conditioning. The primary facility would be Oak Bay Recreation Center on B Street, and the specific area we'd be looking at within the facility would be the ice arena spectator area, as well as the common areas on the main floor, which are all wheelchair accessible, as well as in the Oak Bay Monterey Center, the garden court area, which again is accessible, and the Greater Victoria Public Library Oak Bay branch. And it can also say that all libraries in the Greater Victoria region are engaged. Activating the drop-in cooling centers requires coordination and collaboration with our senior parks and recreation staff, followed by distribution of just-in-time communication confirming the location of our drop-in cooling centers. Our municipal neighbors have confirmed that their drop-in cooling centers will be available to Oak Bay residents living nearby. We also have an informal agreement with the Oak Bay Volunteers or Oak Bay Volunteer Organization to monitor their clients during triggered events and to notify the appropriate authorities if they identify any causes for concern related to heat events. Oak Bay Volunteers have approximately 400 clients, all recognized as vulnerable Oak Bay seniors. There's also many other seniors in Oak Bay that receive regular services from health and social service related agencies in the Greater Victoria area, most of which have been similarly engaged across systems and communities. Promotion of other respite options such as Carnarvon Water Park, drop-in swimming, and fitness centers and skating are also included in the communication. The communications plan has two components. The first is to promote awareness and self-sufficiency, which includes emergency preparedness articles and local newsletters and communiques and distribution to ENBC extreme heat preparedness guides, as well as emergency preparedness presentations at the Monterey Center and displays at the Wednesday night market. Extensive use of print and social media on the Oak Bay website is also utilized. The second is just-in-time communications, which will use general media releases, our corporate social media channels, and the website to keep the public informed during any triggered events. Heat vulnerability mapping is the next step in regional collaboration and extreme heat response planning. The Oak Bay Emergency Program and Building and Planning are currently participating in a regional application on heat risk, and a vulnerability and resiliency mapping project being led by the CRD for a UBCM grant under the Community Emergency Preparedness Fund. Heat vulnerability mapping by itself is an air temperature map, which can help pinpoint the urban heat island effect, where neighborhoods may be 3 to 4 degrees hotter due to the lack of green space, larger buildings, more concrete, increased distances from water, etc. It can also be a useful extreme heat response planning tool by identifying areas and people at most risk during a heat event and inform which building types are most at risk for overheating. If you add population vulnerability and resiliency maps and potentially identify where the most vulnerable people are located based on demographics data and known factors such as age, health, and income to support longer-term planning and adaptation strategies to reduce our mitigation risk. Projects like extreme heat planning and heat vulnerability mapping will lead to new opportunities for departments like fire, the emergency program, building and planning, parks and recreation to collaborate, and sustainability planning like long-term planning, adaptation, preparedness, and mitigation. All of these will likely influence changes to existing policies and development of new policies, strategies, and actions to increase resiliency of Oak Bay community and its residents. Some opportunities include an urban forest strategy, resiliency framework, biodiversity conservation strategy, asset management strategy, and future housing and transportation policies, which present key opportunities to develop actions that will reduce the urban heat island effect on the safety and health of everyone in our community. An example of sustainability collaboration is the Oak Bay Cool Kit project, which is intended to mobilize individual and neighborhood climate action through participation in a series of interactive engagement activities, including neighborhood conversations, local asset and climate vulnerability mapping, carbon footprint calculators, visioning exercises, and developing localized climate action plans. We hope this report and presentation have outlined how staff have been proactively preparing for triggered events this summer and a reduction in risk and impacts of extreme heat on human health and safety. The recommendation this evening is for Council to receive the report for information. However, we do anticipate that there will be future reports and presentations as to Council as this work progresses. Happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much, Chief McDonald. I have Councillor Green and then Councillor Braithwaite.
Councillor Green, through His Worship.
Thank you very much, Chief McDonald, and that's an excellent report. And I'm so relieved that this kind of planning is being undertaken. I just have one question on transportation planning. for this kind of response. And the only reason I ask is that for those people who cannot access drop-in centers, is there a transportation planning element to the overall plan itself? And I only ask that because I know you mentioned Block Watch and other community or neighborhood-based groups, but I'm just thinking for those people that are either shut in or housebound, it may be very difficult for them to access some of the respite centers that you mentioned. So I just wondered if transportation was going to be part of the plan. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Green. Go ahead, Chief.
Okay. Yes, thank you, Councillor Green. And there, there's been quite a bit of discussion across the province as well as within the region on how best to support residents that, especially ones that are shut-ins. And a great deal of the work leading up to this summer has involved around personal preparedness and supporting tools to try and make vulnerable segments of the population that are shut in able to stay in their homes. So there's been quite a bit of work done on providing education on options for cooling, whether it's purchasing purchasing a portable air conditioning unit or some other types of cooling type systems, as well as trying to have opportunities like that are compatible with air cleaning devices when we look at the increased amount of air quality issues we've had in recent summers with wildfire. So we're also working very closely with, like we talked about with the Oak Bay volunteer groups. There are a large number of other senior-based care organizations around the region. Some of them provide driving services, and we are working with them to make sure that there's communication and coordination with those vulnerable segments, and there are links for people to be able to get to drop-in cooling centers where and when needed. But there still needs to be more work done with that.
Thank you. Anything else, Councillor Green?
No, I really appreciate that. Thank you very much. And I will certainly be asking again in the future. But, and yeah, that's my only concern is that some people who are not online, they're not involved in social media, don't have cell phones, etc., can be extremely vulnerable during a time like this when they also don't have access to transportation or if they live alone. So I very much appreciate your comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Green. Go ahead, Councillor Braithwaite.
Thank you, Mayor, and through you to Chief McDonald. Thanks so much for bringing this report. I did have calls coming into me last year and this year also in regards to this, so this is wonderful to see your report on our agenda. I have been in conversation with the rec center in regards to this as well, and I was under the understanding that if we did have something like a drop-in cooling center, that we then, as an organization, the onus was on us to ensure that we had staff available with a certain level of first aid in that cooling station. So I'm wondering if you can speak to that, and if that is still the case, how that affects our budget in this regard, or is there a budget will there be a budget for the cooling stations?
Thank you, Councillor Braithwaite. Go ahead, Chief McDonald.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you, Councillor, for that question. So when we talk about a drop-in cooling center, it's more in identifying what facilities do we have that have air conditioning where people can get in and seek respite and get hopefully drop their core temperatures down. The areas we've talked about, really the intent has been to allow people to get access to common areas of the building that really anyone in the community can get access to. So we're not specifically looking at bringing in a bunch of staff or providing first aid services. It's really making sure that people are aware that we have air conditioned buildings available for them to get access to that also have water fountains and whatnot available to them. The other key piece is in regards to the arena and the spectator area is, we've definitely talked closely with senior recreation staff to ensure that there's coordination with regards to access to that space in regards to any other services that are going on. but at this point, I haven't heard anyone in the region that is doing a coordinated drop-in center as opposed to a dedicated facility. And I think that maybe the confusion may come about where some facilities have talked about doing overnight facilities, which has got an entirely different level of care, which we have not at this point seen a need to go down or have the ability to support on a regular basis.
Thank you, Chief. Anything else, Councillor Brithier?
Thank you for your answer, Chief. And thank you. I have nothing else.
Thanks. I have Councillor Ney and then Councillor Patterson. Go ahead, Councillor Ney.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you to Chief McDonald, thank you very much, Chief. It was really useful to hear the overview and the work that you've been involved in here. And I most appreciate that very multi-pronged approach that you're taking to this, to, awareness, education, community engagement, and planning for these triggering events. So it's useful to hear exactly how that's rolling out. I was most interested in your comments in the strategic plan that and your observation about how the community engagement on urban forestry and climate change, et cetera, it has a valuable role to play. And I'm just wondering, how exactly is your department involved in informing some of the initiatives that will come out of that community engagement exercise, or is this the piece, or is there a more hands-on involvement? I was wondering.
Thank you, Councillor Ney. Go ahead, Chief McDonald.
Thank you, Councillor Ney. That's an excellent question, and I think everyone would agree that we have an extremely long runway ahead of us, and we're really at the beginning stages here. And I think as far as Oak Bay goes, we're really at a starting point. We've got Mr. Chris Hidley, who's got this amazing program going with Cool Kits, and it's a fantastic program and serves as a great example of how interdepartmentally we can all collaborate more. So is there a whole bunch of formal collaboration that's cross-departmental involving fire and emergency management in that area specifically right now? Maybe not, but we have started to engage, and we've all are starting to see the necessity as well as the benefit for it, and it really needs to be across departmental, across municipal, across regional approach to really make headway in a lot of these areas to be successful. And there is a tremendous amount of support in-house here as well as within the region to collaborate on a lot of these initiatives, which is very positive to see.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Then Councillor Patterson.
Yes, thank you, Mayor, and through you to Chief McDonald. Thank you for the report. I just would like to touch on one thing that I didn't see in the report. Obviously, yes, there is a lot of planning to do, and greatly appreciated that so many people are involved in working on this now. One thing that I didn't see in here, and that is defined in many provinces as high risk in these heat-related incidents, is that temperature be considered for events, particularly of physical activity, so that in fact we as a community are setting a good leadership example. But do we understand, or has it even been discussed yet as part of this planning, who is responsible if we get into high temperatures for making the call as to whether or not events take place? Because in many municipalities they are defined as high risk if there will be heavy physical activity in extreme heat.
Chief McDonald.
Thank you, Worship. And to Councillor Patterson, I think probably the easiest way to summarize this is if they're municipal employees that are working in activities or events, then our Occupational Health and Safety Division really provides a lot of direction and clarity with regards to how work is done, required rest breaks, and whatnot. In regards to public events or sporting events, I think we'd be taking our direction from Health Authority. And as I you said at the beginning, these types of events, they're top down, and we really look for direction from provincial and regional health authorities with regards to taking guidance on it.
Thank you. And I'm just going to have one last call for if anybody, members of the public, wish to address council. Perhaps Councillor Zalka, since you're likely the last person with their hand up, you can maybe make the motion to receive as well, and then make your comments or questions.
Thank you very much, Chair. I was just going to make the motion since my questions have already been asked. So I'll make the motion to receive the report from Chief Frank McDonald, that it be received, please.
Moved and seconded. Thank you. I don't see any other hands up, and I don't see any members of the public who have indicated they wish to speak. I'm just going to check with staff. Nope, that is correct. There's no members wishing to speak. So I'm going to come back to this table. We have a motion on the floor to receive. Any further discussion? All those in favor? Any opposed? None opposed. That carries. Thank you very much. And thank you very much, Chief McDonald, for your time this evening. And I from the Community Artists Society, Mr. Payne, our Director of Financial Services, is here with a report. Mr. Payne, is there anything you wish to provide as an overview here?
Your Worship, the only thing I'll say is that there's $4,600 remaining in the grant and aid budget for council consideration.
Thank you. Is Ms. Watson available to us for questions this evening? The applicant? Don't see him online. Okay, thank you. Go ahead, Councillor Green.
Yes, thank you. Would you be willing to accept a motion before questions, or would you prefer questions first?
I prefer questions, and I want to give the public an opportunity to speak because it is open for public comment. So I'll make that call at this point for public. Any public input, please give it now. Don't anticipate large amounts on this, but I have to give the opportunity. So are there any questions of staff? I'll just have one question. I guess I was going to ask it of the applicant, but Mr. Payne, you're the only person here. The only question I really had on this one was just, obviously, well, not obviously, the event that goes on is incredibly supportable in terms of the brush up and the need. We have traditionally covered the cost of insurance, and those costs have gone up. My question was really related to the specific ask, which seemed to be, they have a total expenses of about $2,000, most of which are covered by fees. And I'm just curious about why they asked for the larger amount, if you had any sense of that. And my guess is you probably don't. You're just looking at the same application as we are, but I'm going to ask the question of you since we don't seem to have the applicant here.
Well, thank you, Your Worship. No, that's not a question that I asked the applicant.
Okay, thank you. I just am looking to see if there's any members of the public who wish to speak to this. I don't see any indicators on the online form or on the app, on the Zoom app. So with that, I will turn to council for a motion. I think Councillor Green, you indicated you wish to make the motion, so go ahead.
Yes, thank you very much, Chair. I will move to receive the report, and thank you to Mr. Payne for being here tonight. And I would also support the grant of $1,000 that is requested from the group. It has been a really tough 2 years for these kinds of groups, and especially for the Bowker Creek Brush Up. I think we had the first one last summer, again after 2 years. But I think it's incredibly important that we support our local artists. They do so much to enrich the community. So that's my motion. Thank you.
That's moved and seconded. Thank you. I'm going to just separate the two motions just because I think one is procedural and one is more fundamental. So I'm going to call a question on the motion to receive first. So this is just the motion to receive. So all those in favor? Any opposed? None opposed? And then to the meat of the motion, which is to approve the application to the amount of $1,000. Is there any discussion? Go ahead, Councillor. Oh, no discussion. Looking for hands. All those in favor? Sorry. And any opposed? Not opposed. That carries. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Payne. Moving on to section 8.2. This is the new initiatives impact assessment for gas-powered equipment. Again, any members of the public who wish to address us on this matter are more than welcome to do so. This is the time to call the 1855 number and hit the *9 to raise your hand, or if you're in the Zoom app, to raise your hand within the application. I have Mr. Coates, do you want to provide a quick overview? The report largely speaks for itself, but perhaps you can just give a verbal overview for those watching in terms of what the process is going forward under this report.
There we go. Thank you, Your Worship. My button has got a mind of its own here. Either that or my thumb does. Yes, so you do have a report before you that goes over this issue that is a result of Council's May 24th motion to consider pursuing a phase out of gas-powered garden equipment in the district on residential properties. So the report talks about some of the issues that were fleshed out in the initial tranche of analysis in relation to this issue, and as you'll see them in point form in the report, there's a scope definition and defining objectives probably needs some clarification in order to get really moving. Considering other issues such as phasing and particularly paying attention to the level of public engagement on a initiative of this nature, looking at whether there should be incentives and whether there should be seasonal exceptions, as well as education, compliance, and monitoring and enforcement. We have presented 3 options for how to take this work on, and you'll see them in the report, and largely the timelines are all similar based on the potential of different options with procurement of outsourced services. The recommendations are to pursue this work, add it to the strategic plan, or council priority plan as initiative number 49, and report back on the basis of option 2, which is a staff-led work with some consultant services for a higher level of community engagement. And I just note that since this report was written, staff did connect with municipalities in the Greater Vancouver region that are undertaking similar work. So we've now formed a working group that the District of Oak Bay participates in with Metro Vancouver Regional District, the City of Vancouver, Vancouver Parks Board, and the City of Port Moody. So we're all sort of at the same stage of this analysis. So we're talking about sharing work and benefiting from the experiences and information that others have. So to try to approach this in a more coordinated fashion, and naturally we'd have to touch base with the provincial government because there are certainly issues around spheres of concurrent authority and what the limits are on local government's ability to regulate or prohibit, and all this work would be fleshed out. So as the report suggests, we'd do an initial report back in February, so that sort of gets us through the election. It gets us a chance to do a lot of the work that's necessary to really inform that first decision point and have it move forward from then. Clearly, this is a council initiative and a council's discretion to proceed, but we're happy to take any questions on anything that we've presented to you at this point, and any other questions that you might have to move forward.
Okay, thank you. I'm just going to make one clarification to your comments there before I go to the members of council. You mentioned that the basis of option 2, which includes a consultant, but what I heard from you is that this would come back in February for a touch point in terms of, so that would happen before any hiring of a consultant or anything of that nature. Is that correct?
Mayor Murdoch, that's correct, okay. Yes. And so, along with that then would be a budget ask for that type of work, but it's predicated on the notion that our one communications specialist staff person, this would probably take up too much of her time to move this thing forward in the way in which we think that council would want to take that. And so yes, but there would be a check-in at that point. So it's really just putting a bunch of background material together, getting some semblance of what this looks like, and some clarity and recommendations on how to deal with the community engagement on this.
Thanks for that clarification. Sorry to jump into the speaking order there. Go ahead, Councillor Ney, then Councillor Braithwaite.
Thank you very much, and through you, Mayor, to staff, thank you, Mr. Coates, for this nice overview of the framework and the direction, and giving us some options about how to move forward. Yeah, I like option 2, and I certainly would be willing to support that when the time comes. But I really appreciate how you've prompted us to think about how this definitely will have a lot of community engagement, and the approach you're already speaking to about piggybacking on the work and sussing out the way other municipalities are approaching this issue is certainly worthwhile. So because it is complicated, and I have a sense, I can only speak for myself though, when moving this forward, the idea really was to sort of expedite the transition to electric gardening equipment for the purpose of improving our livability and the carbon footprint, etc. But it was not to induce hardship. And so I really hope when we get to that place that those ways that those who may be where this is onerous, where they're experiencing hardship around this, that we can think of these options around rebates or exemptions or whatever that may be, will be explored through that community engagement process. So I really appreciate the touchstones that you've put before us. So thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Ney. I have Councillor Braithwaite and Green.
Thank you, Mayor. And through you, mine is similar to Councillor Ney's about the not inducing hardship part. And so when I look at the executive summary of the reports, where you have the points underneath there, I'm hoping that property size is going to be taken into consideration in those points as well, and that might be I don't know where that might fall, but that's a lot of the feedback that I've been hearing from people about property size too, and so I'm hoping that's going to be taken into consideration. But I think it's very supportable. Option 2 is very supportable. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Braithwaite, and go ahead, Councillor Green. And then again, I'm just making sure the public knows this is your chance. If you wish to speak to this item, please do so now. We're going to get to motions here momentarily if we have no further speakers. Go ahead, Councillor Green.
Thank you very much, and I'll be brief. And to you, Mr. Coates, through you, Mayor, thank you very much for a great report. I too will be supporting option 2. I have had a lot of feedback on this issue, not so much because of what we're attempting to do in the larger scheme of things in terms of climate change and noise mitigation, but because a number of residents have large properties, as Councillor Braithwaite's pointed out. They've also made recent purchases for gas-powered equipment that preceded this move. So, I think they're very concerned about the hardship aspect and the fact that is there a way that we could possibly grandfather in newer equipment, and then when the time comes for replacement, those folks could be considered. So it's just, we don't want this to be a negative outcome. I think all of us really want this to be a positive outcome. But I think, there are legitimate concerns on the part of the community. So I really appreciate option 2, and thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Green. Go ahead, Councillor Patterson.
Thank you. And yes, thank you for this report, Mr. Coates. I generally am in favor of it. One thing that I would ask about that isn't included, since you are in discussions with other municipalities, which is great to know, will there also be discussion on the environmental impacts, particularly potential impacts with recycling or landfill impacts of implementing these kinds of programs? We've had many decades of operating this type of equipment, so a phase over may have repercussions, and I'm wondering if that will be touched on during the initial discussions.
Mr. Coates.
Your Worship, through you to Councillor Patterson, yes, that's certainly something we can look at. I'm taking notes of the feedback that Council's providing tonight, which is very helpful. And certainly I think the notion of community engagement, that's probably done at an early stage, I would imagine, to try to get the community to be able to provide that feedback. So in terms of the disposal aspect of things, yes, we'll certainly make a note of that. That can be a big issue for sure, and all of these things are essentially on the table. So what we'll be working really hard to try to sort of capture as much of that as we can, and certainly be looking to benefit from council's thinking when we come back with the first report, and also then too when we engage the community and get feedback on the host of issues that there are here.
Thank you very much. Any other discussion? I don't see any members of the public who have indicated they wish to speak through the app here, just confirming with staff. The answer is no. So back to this table. Can I get a motion to receive the report first? Moved and seconded. Thank you. Any discussion on receipt? Seeing none, all those in favor? Any opposed? None opposed. That carries. And then we just have the recommendation that's here. So
I'll move option 2.
moved, and so that's the basically be added to the council priority plan and report back on the basis of option 2. Moved and seconded. Any other discussion on the motion that's in front of us? I don't see any. I'll just really brief comment. I'm supportive of this path forward. I do think it needs some teasing out. We've certainly heard from people, and I think we always knew the edge cases were going to be difficult. I'm very curious about what the province will allow us to do in terms of the environmental regulation side of the equation. So I think that step back here in February makes a lot of sense for us to kind of help fine tune this. So thank you for that work and allowing this to kind of get some clarification in short order. Don't see any other discussion. All those in favor? Any opposed? None opposed. That carries. Moving on to 8.4, also subject to public input, is the BIA financial statements. We have Mr. Payne with us this evening again to just provide a quick overview. We have the report, Mr. Payne. Feel free to give a synopsis here.
Thank you and good evening, Your Worship. I don't have any presentation prepared for this item, but I'm available for any questions that council may have. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Just for my clarification, is the appropriate, are we approving this piece, or we're just by receipt, we're essentially receiving the financial report?
Your Worship, there's no requirement in the bylaw for council to approve the financial statements. So it would just be a motion to receive.
Yeah, before I get to motions, I'll go to questions. And again, if there's any members of the public who wish to have any comments, this is your chance. We'll probably get through this item fairly quickly, so please call in and hit *9, or in the Zoom app, hit the reactions and raise hand. Go ahead, Councillor Patterson.
Yes, thank you, Mayor, and through you to Mr. Payne. As stated, there's no, we would only be receiving these. There's not an approval on these. However, I do recognize that for the size of the account the Business Improvement Association has, that the cost of an audit is unduly onerous, and I am wondering if it is perhaps appropriate that a motion be put forward for council to direct staff to amend bylaw 4736 to replace audited financial statement with a requirement for just a statement of financial information.
Mr. Payne?
Through Your Worship, that's certainly something that council could do if it's the will of council that to not require audited financial statements. A simple amendment could be in order. There are certainly business improvement areas that bylaws that don't require audited financial statements, and there are examples of some that do. So, staff is more than willing to provide the merits of either of those choices, or simply move forward with bylaw amendments as council sees fit.
Thank you, Mr. Payne. Before you make the motion, I'm just going to get one clarification on that factor. So as I understand this, the BIA falls under the Societies Act, so they have an AGM and they would approve their audited or their financial statements, and they have the option of waiving the audit requirements under the Societies Act. Is that the process that they follow currently, Mr. Payne?
Your Worship, I couldn't confirm if that's the process that they do follow. I can confirm that that would be the requirement, as you correctly stated, under the Societies Act. So I would only have to assume that they are following that.
Okay, sorry. Councillor Braithwaite, who attended the AGM, confirmed that. Go ahead, Councillor Braithwaite.
That's confirmed, and I appreciate that Councillor Patterson has brought this up, because it is an area of concern for the BIA, because it is a very large expense for such a small budget.
So from a practical perspective, if there's a motion raised here to direct the changes to the bylaw just to include wording for the financial statements, not explicitly audited financial statements, I'm assuming probably a timeline attached that probably isn't necessary, but we'll bring it back at a point of time. Because you mentioned in your report that 2025 is the next time the bylaw is up for consideration. Would the intention be to do it prior to that? That's a fairly long ways away. Mr. Payne?
Your worship, if we received a motion from council to amend the bylaw to remove the audited requirement, that's something that could be done quite quickly, and certainly before the renewal bylaw would come forward in 2024 for the 2025 year. So yeah, something that could be done quite quickly.
Okay, I mean, again, one last question before it gets put forward. Is there any concerns from you on that change? This is something that's been on our books for a long time, but not enforced for a long time. Any concerns that you would raise about making this without some staff report to go along with it?
Your worship, it's just a matter of risk tolerance from council and the due diligence that can be imposed on the organization. Certainly, the fact that the organization that we impose taxes on behalf of that organization, that's not a voluntary taxation, could warrant the requirement for audited financial statements or the desire for audited financial statements from council. But again, there's no right answer. If council is accepting of increased risk for having unaudited financial statements, that's certainly an acceptable standard in the industry.
Thank you for that clarification. So we'll do with the motion arising after the if that's the will of council, after the motion to receive is contemplated. Before we get to a motion, I'm still dealing with questions. Councillor Braithwaite, you're indicating you wish to add another comment or question, and I'll go to Councillor Green.
Yeah, I just, through you, Chair. So Mr. Payne, do they have to do another audited financial statement next year? Do they have to do it every year? And I understand that in the past they have never had to do one up until this point. And so that's where my level of comfort is that we wouldn't have to have them. But would they have to right now do an audited financial statement each year up until 2025 when it's their agreement is renewed?
Mr. Payne?
Your worship, yeah, that's the current requirement, is that the association produce audited financial statements on an annual basis. I do understand that requirement hasn't been made for some time. But yeah, that the current bylaw wording would require them to prepare audited financial statements every year.
Okay, thank you for that clarification. Councillor Green?
Yes, thank you, Mayor. Just to add to the conversation and for the information of council, I did have a conversation with Heather Leary of the BIA, and this is an incredible hardship for them. I think she quoted me something like in the neighborhood of $10,000 to $12,000 to complete a fully audited financial statement every year. This is where corporate memory and corporate history are helpful. The municipality has not required audited financial statements from the BIA for some years, and Councillor Braithwaite may have a better memory about this than I do because I've not been involved as long as she has. But I think in this case, I would totally support an amended motion to accept merely financial statements each year. I think to require them each year to spend that kind of money potentially would be, it would be unreasonable on our part. They are such a strong partner on so many levels, and they do so much for the community generally. So I have a huge level of trust in their ability to manage this issue. So thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Green. I'm looking to see if there's any members of the public who address council. I don't see anybody in mine. Staff have confirmed. So we're back to this table. So to approve these, or essentially the motion in front of us is to receive, which is thing. So I think we can deal with that first. And if there's a motion arising to give us further direction, we can deal with that. So is there looking to move receipt of the report? Is there a seconder? Moved and seconded. Thank you. Any further discussion on the receipt? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Any opposed? None opposed. Councillor Patterson, do you want to make a motion arising to direct staff to remove the audit requirement?
I will make the motion that council directs staff to amend Bylaw 4736, Oak Bay Business Improvement Area Bylaw 2020, Section 10, by replacing the words annual audited financial statement with the words annual statement of financial information. And I can add further that that same section requires that the statements be done in accordance with generally accepted accounting principles.
So let's move and second it. Just going to go to Mr. Payne here to make sure that that wording is sufficient. Does the wording statement of financial information or financial reporting, does that impact? I just want to make sure we're getting the correct technical terminology applied to this.
Thank you, Your Worship. That terminology makes sense to me, and I believe will accomplish what Council's desire appears to be in this case.
Okay, well, we'll see what Council's desire is in just a minute as we go to a question. The motion is made and seconded. Is there any further discussion? Go ahead, Councillor Appleton.
Thank you, Your Worship. I was just wondering whether and I don't oppose the motion rising on principle, and I do recognize that, and I think it's a good move to alleviate that potential financial hardship for the BIA. I'm wondering, the motion that is before us essentially eliminates the need for an audit. I'm just wondering whether Mr. Payne might comment on other, as he mentioned, some BIA bylaws provide for an audit and some do not. I'm just wondering whether, from a risk perspective, it might be prudent to set potentially an upward limit for the BIA budget at which it would not require an audit. The BIA has had an increase in budget recently. I mean, I don't anticipate it going that high, but just in terms of generally accepted accounting practice, what would be a reasonable budget number to expect an audit to be necessary?
Mr. Payne?
Your Worship, I would be answering in somewhat of an arbitrary way. The bylaw right now limits the tax levy that can be imposed on it to $500,000. Currently, the tax levy is about $100,000. So you can pick somewhere in between there, I suppose, where it would be appropriate. For context, I could, if given a couple minutes, take a look at the downtown business improvement area total revenues. They require an audit and provide that for context. But otherwise, my answer would be not well researched and a bit arbitrary.
Thank you, Mr. Payne. Anything else, Councillor Appleton?
Thank you, Your Worship. I guess I would just make the follow-up comment that, again, I support what's being put in front of us in principle. I would be much more comfortable if staff were given an opportunity to provide an analysis along the lines of what Mr. Payne is saying, and so that we could, through the amending bylaw, potentially set a threshold that council was comfortable with, that was commensurate with what other BIAs of similar size and structure use. So I would like to see that analysis myself. I wouldn't call it a complete deal breaker, but I personally would vote against the motion on the floor, not because I don't think that the BIA can produce absolutely adequate materials, but because I would like to see that analysis. Thank you, Your Worship.
Thank you, Councillor Appleton. I'm wondering if there's a couple of ways of going about this. One, I can certainly speak to other societies that I've been on under the $500,000, in that $500,000 range, that have not required to typically waive that as a piece that's not an exceptional threshold. That being said, I think, Mr. Payne, with this motion on the floor, would it be reasonable just to include a short, when that bylaw comes back for the changes, just to include a quick summary of some of the other comparables out there in terms of whether the requirements are for the size and the waiving and the requirement for audited statements?
Your Worship, yeah, that would be absolutely no problem.
Okay, especially given there's no time pressure on this one, I think that would be a reasonable ask. So thank you for including that then in the report back as the bylaws come back. So with that direction and the ask, we have the motion on the floor. Is there any other discussion on this? Thank you, Councillor Patterson, and thank you, Councillor Appleton, for those clarifications. I think that will lead to a good decision-making process, so I appreciate that. All those in favor? Any opposed? None opposed. That carries. And we're moving on to section 9. Now we only have one.
Excuse me, Chair. I have a point of information.
Oh yeah. Is it related to 8.4 or?
No, it's related. It's a point of personal information. I have to leave the meeting. I apologize. I'm not well.
No, understood. You did warn us ahead of time, Councillor Zelka. Please rest. Take care of yourself. There is a potential motion, notice of motion at the end of this agenda, which we will get to, and if we can't if there's no support, we'll bring it back at a future meeting, and you can speak to it then, okay?
That will be fine. Thank you very much, and I apologize.
Nope,
Okay,
no apology required. Take care of yourself.
okay.
All right, thank you. Moving on to number 9, section 9.9, item number 9.1. This item is not subject to public input, but I just want to point out that the next sections do. So sections 10.1, 10.2, 10.3, and 10.4 do have public input options, and they are, so if you're watching the live stream, there's a bit of a 1 minute or so delay. This is an appropriate time to call into the 1855 number. And then if you're wanting to speak to 10.1, hit *9. You can do it anytime now. If not, just you can call in and then hit *9 when the item that you're interested in speaking to comes live. So I'm just giving you that heads up at this point, so that you're well prepared as we move through the follow-on items. So with that, we move to item number 9.1, which is upland siting and design. Mr. Weber, you have the floor, and we have the applicant here as well to answer any questions.
Thank you, Worship, and good evening. At its March 28th, 2022 meeting, Council approved combined upland siting design application ADP 00144 and hazardous conditions development permit DP 000037 for renovations to an existing single-family home located at 3465 Beach Drive. Subsequent to approval, the scope of the proposed works was reduced to not include a prominent addition to the rear of the home, which included an attached deck, in addition to the second story of the south side of the home, as well as an altered roof design. The overall character of the proposal remains the same, but as the form of what initially approved was moderately altered, additional council approval is required. The conditions that were proposed for inclusion on the initial development permit will remain in place, with the exception of the condition requiring the proposal to be redesigned to protect 2 mature Gary oak trees in the rear yard. This is as the revised proposal no longer includes a large patio that was initially proposed, which would have impacted these trees. Staff recommend that the revised plans be approved and request council direction on this application. As you mentioned, the applicant is present, and the property owner, Alex Ackervan, is in attendance this evening as well to answer any questions along with myself. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Weber. Welcome to our hallowed halls, Mr. Banks. Nice to see you in person. And this seems reasonably straightforward, but I'll go to members of the council if there's any questions on this, on the application in front of us. The question really is, do we send it back to advisory design panel, or do we deal with it here this evening? So if there's any questions from council, members of council to staff or to the applicant, I'm happy to accommodate them. I see no big hands popping up here, so perhaps I can look to first get a motion to receive the report. Moved, receipt. Moved and seconded. Any discussion? All those in favor? Any opposed? None opposed. Thank you. We move on then. Just can I get a motion arising? Go ahead.
Your Worship, I would move that the revised plans for uplands siting and design ADP 00144 and development permit DP 00037 for the property located at 3465 Beach Drive be approved.
Moved and seconded. Thank you. Any other discussion? Go ahead, Councillor Green.
I just have a question about the role of the ADP. Would it be courteous to share this revision with them? Or is there a rationale for not referring it to them for a final look? Thank you.
Certainly, there is a rationale provided in the letter, but since we have Mr. Banks here in the room, perhaps you could just speak briefly to the nature of these changes. They essentially are reducing the number of changes back to largely the original form of the house, as I understand it. So perhaps you can just give a quick overview.
Yes, thank you, Your Worship. I wasn't quite clear on who Councillor Green wanted to refer it back to. Was she talking about design panel?
So we're just curious about, I mean, we could certainly send it back to them just for information, but the question was whether or not to refer it back to them for further input.
As Mr. Weber pointed out, really, we've reduced the scope of the project significantly. The costs were getting very, very high, and dealing with the recommendation for redesign for the trees, I guess the redesign is moving it back to the original footprint. So there's no impact on any of the trees that were mentioned. The upper floor addition, which was about a third of the upper floor, has been removed. And the exterior treatment of the house, as we had proposed originally, has been maintained without the removal of the roof. The interior works are more substantial because we're trying to rearrange the spaces to accommodate the uses we had in a originally much bigger building.
Thank you. Does that answer the question, Councillor Green? Go ahead.
Yes, and I appreciate the comments and the input. Thank you very much.
I think, Councillor Green, your point, though, that this should just be provided to the advisory design panel as a courtesy to let them know if this passes, just so they understand. If they drive by in a year's time and see not what they were originally contemplated, it's probably worthwhile. So we don't think we need a motion to that effect, but perhaps we can just circulate the changes as if this passes, or provide an update at the next meeting.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Green. Is there any other discussion? Don't see any. I'll call the question then. All those in favor? Any opposed? None opposed. That carries. Thank you very much, and have a great evening. Welcome, and thanks for joining us in our very warm chambers this evening. We are moving on to section 10, which is bylaws and permits. They're all subject to public input. Again, I would ask if members of the public wish to address council on these items, please do your point to call in and hit *9. Certainly 10.1, if you could do that at this point. We will get to you as soon as we go through the process of overview questions and then public input. With this, we have alternate tax collection scheme. We have Mr. Payne, our Director of Financial Services, back with us again. Welcome, Mr. Payne.
Thank you, Your Worship. Currently, the district has a alternative tax scheme bylaw that provides for prepayment of tax interest using a static formula. In other words, the interest paid to residents remains the same for the term of the bylaw. As you're aware right now, the environment is a changing interest rate environment. So that static interest rate can become quite not well correlated to the actual market. So what we're proposing here is that a new bylaw be adopted that pegs the interest rate paid for prepayment of interest to the provincial regulation for the interest for overpayment of taxes. So that floats with the provincial interest rate, prime rate, which floats with the prime rate as well. So adopting this bylaw will mean no further amendments are necessary in the future as interest rates change rapidly. So that's it, Your Worship. I'm available for any questions.
Thank you very much, Mr. Payne. Are there any questions of Mr. Payne? Go ahead, Councillor Appleton.
Thank you, Your Worship, and through you to Mr. Payne. Mr. Payne, if I understand this correctly, I mean, really the primary benefit to the where did the benefits accrue? I mean, the primary benefit to the district is simply the lack of bureaucratic time that it takes to amend the bylaw periodically to adjust the interest rates based on a sort of moving target. Is that kind of how I get it? And essentially the benefit to the district is to alleviate staff time to constantly have to tweak this number. Is that correct?
Mr. Payne?
Yes, Your Worship. I would say that's the primary benefit. Also, the benefit is that at certain interest rate environments, the static percentage, which was 2%, can be way more expensive than what should be paid. But in the current environment, it's irrelevant for taxpayers to receive that sort of interest rate. So it's also a matter of fairness for the taxpayers as well. But yeah, I would say the primary benefit is the bureaucratic time saving.
Thank you. Again, I'll make a last call here to the public. If they have any comments or questions, please follow the instructions on screen or in the Zoom app. I just have another question, Mr. Payne, to you, and that is just my curiosity about how frequently this is adjusted. Is it monthly, and does that process add to staff workload, or is it essentially an automated process within our systems to track it over time?
Your Worship, it's adjusted 3 times a year by the province, except for in the case with rapidly changing interest rates. And no, it doesn't add any time to our workload, as we have to adjust interest rate for overpaid taxes anyways. So it's a simple configuration at that time as well.
Very good. Thank you for that clarification. I still see nothing on my screen that indicates any members of the public wish to speak to us. I'm not terribly surprised by that, but I still have to ask the question of the public. Not seeing any comments from the public. Can I get a motion to receive the report first? Moved and seconded. Thank you. Any discussion? All those in favor? Any opposed? Unopposed? And then we have a recommendation here of moving first and second and third reading. We'll do first and second together if that's the will of council. Moved. Can I just have it read out just because it is a bylaw?
I'll move first reading. Do you want to move receipt first? Okay, okay. I'll move second reading. First and second, sorry. Of bylaw number 4817. Is that the one that we're on? 4821. Sorry, 4821. Oh, sorry, I was on the wrong one. First and second reading of bylaw 4821, that the alternate tax collection scheme bylaw be given first, second reading.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Thank you. Any discussion on the motion in front of us? Seeing none, I will call the question. All those in favor? Any opposed? None opposed? Move third reading.
And I'll move that the alternative tax collection scheme bylaw 2022 number 4821 be given third reading.
Moved and seconded. Thank you. I'll call the question. All those in favor? Any opposed? None opposed? That carries. Thank you for that. The adoption will come back to next week's meeting. Item number 10.2. Again, if you're interested in speaking to the zoning bylaw amendment for 2367 Estevan Avenue, you are welcome to do so. Please hit *9 at this time. I do understand that the applicant is with us, either in person or online. I think online I saw them, yes. So we will go to them if there's any questions. Before we go to the public, I just perhaps get a quick overview here from Mr. Weber in terms of the what's in front of us tonight. And this is the first time I think we've ever used this alternate process without a public hearing. So it may just be worth a reminder to members of council and to the public as to what's going on here tonight.
Certainly. Thank you very much. The District of Oak Bay has received a zoning bylaw amendment application to permit a higher occupable height for a principal building in the RS5 zone, single-story designation than permitted for the property located at 2367 Estevan Avenue. The applicant is proposing to demolish an existing single-vehicle carport that is attached to the west side of the home, construct a new single-story addition at the rear of the home with a crawl space and approximately 55 meters squared of floor area, construct a new accessory building in the rear yard to be utilized as a single-vehicle garage with approximately 24 meters squared of floor area, and construct a new permanent paver patio and driveway extension in the rear yard. Under the district zoning bylaw, permitting the home to have a higher occupable height while remaining in the single-story designation would allow the property to have a 5% greater lot coverage, allowing the construction of the previously noted addition to the home and garage. No trees are proposed to be removed as part of the proposal, and the existing approximately 70% canopy coverage exceeds the 35% target for the zone required by the tree protection bylaw. Staff have reviewed the proposal with applicable district bylaws and policies from the official committee plan and determined that it conforms, with the exception of the proposed principal building occupable height, which is the subject of this application, as well as an existing legal non-conforming principal building front lot line setback and front yard paved surface coverage that would be unaffected by this proposal. The existing west interior side lot line setback and total side lot line setback additionally do not conform at present, but would be rendered conforming by the proposed removal of the attached carport. Staff support the application and recommend a site-specific text amendment to Schedule B of the zoning bylaw, bylaw 4817, to allow the subject property to qualify for 35% lot coverage by listing a higher maximum permitted occupable height for this property. Staff presented this application to the Advisory Planning Commission Land Use at the June 7th, 2022 meeting, and the Commission recommended that the subject application be approved and that Council not seek a community amenity contribution. Staff presented this application to Council at the June 13th Council meeting, and as the proposal was consistent with the official committee plan, Council voted to proceed with the proposed bylaw amendment without public hearing. Staff subsequently notified the public of Council's intent to consider first reading and up to 3 readings of the bylaw amendment in 2 consecutive issues of a local newspaper published on June 30th and July 7th, and through a mail out to property owners and tenants living within 50 meters of the subject property. As of the date of this meeting, 3 pieces of public correspondence have been received in support of the application, in addition to the signatures of support from the neighboring properties that the applicant has provided. Staff recommend that council amend the citation for bylaw number 4817 to read zoning bylaw number 3531, 1986, amendment bylaw number 4817, 2022, which utilizes our updated naming convention, and that council give first, second, and third reading to bylaw number 4817. The applicant, Russ Collins, is in attendance this evening along with myself to answer any questions should council have any. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Weber. And procedurally, I think what I will do is just to follow in accordance somewhat with the public hearing process, I'm going to look for in order that the motion report be received, that the citation be amended to that naming convention, and that we do first and second reading, and then, or I think first and second reading, and then we'll take public input if there's any. And then if following that, we can call the question on second reading, and then we'll move on to third reading if that's appropriate. So that's similar to a public hearing process, and I think it'd be familiar to people, and if that's all right. I'm getting nods from staff that that's appropriate, so we'll do that. So can I first get a motion to receive the report? Moved and seconded, thank you. Any discussion on that receipt? Seeing none, all those in favor? Any opposed, not opposed? Can I get the motion to that the citation be amended to the naming convention? You can read it aloud. If you
I'll move
don't
that
mind.
the citation for bylaw number 4817 be amended to read zoning bylaw number 3531, 1986, amendment bylaw number 4817, 2022 be amended.
Yep.
Yes.
Moved, is there a seconder? Moved and seconded. Any discussion on the changing of that citation? Seeing none, all those in favor? Any opposed, not opposed? And then you can read, we can do first and second reading together on this, Mr. Coates? Yeah, do first and second reading if you don't mind.
I'll move that the zoning bylaw number 3531, 1986, amendment bylaw number 4817, 2022 be given first and second reading as amended.
Moved and seconded, thank you. So before we get to any votes, I'm going to again reach out to the public and see if there's any members of the public who wish to address council. I do not see any. We have the correspondence in front of us within the package. Are there any questions from council to staff or the applicant at this time? Do not see any hands going up. And so we'll come back to this table. I'm looking one last time to see if there's any other public input that we're seeking. Don't see any. So I'm ready to call the question on first and second reading. All those in favor? Any opposed? None opposed. And with that passage, I'll actually ask for a third reading, and then we'll come back to adoption at the next meeting. So is there a third reading?
I'll move that the zoning bylaw number 3531, 1986, amendment bylaw number 4817, 2022 be given third reading.
Moved and seconded. Thank you very much. Any further discussion? We don't usually have it on third reading, but I'll allow it if someone's had a thought. Not seeing any, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Any opposed? None opposed. Thank you very much to the applicants, and I just want to express my appreciation to staff. This has been a difficult one for a reasonable accommodation. To have to go through a zoning amendment seemed to be the most efficient way given the state of our bylaw language. So thank you, Mr. Collins, and to Ms. Fuller for your time and patience on this as we go through this process. And we'll probably see you next week as we go through the motion to adopt will be up at that point. So thank you and have a great evening. Moving on to item number 10.3. Again, I'll make the call. If any members of the public wish to address us on this item, please raise your hand at this time. Perhaps I will just go to Mr. Payne once again, our Director of Financial Services, for the Delegated Authority report in front of us. Welcome back, Mr. Payne.
Thank you, Your Worship. We've got some housekeeping amendments to the Delegated Authority of Administrative Function bylaw before you. The housekeeping amendments accomplish three things. They embed our current practice for check signing authority in a new section 10.12. It expands the list of excluded purchases to include bulk water and sewer through statutory monopolies and taxing authorities such as the CRD. And lastly, it updates the schedule of payment authorities with new job titles from new positions since the last amendment. And so the staff are recommending that council give 3 readings to that draft bylaw today. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Payne. Are there questions from members of council on this report? I don't see any. Go ahead, Councillor Appleton.
Thank you, Your Worship, and through you to Mr. Payne. Just with regards to item 2 on the list of things covered, if you could just sort of describe the nature of what types of typical payments would be provided in terms of water and sewer in this type of thing, and also in addition to that, if you could just sort of describe what would constitute a statutory monopoly and what purchasing would occur from that type of body.
Thank you, Councillor Appleton. Go ahead, Mr. Payne.
Thank you, Your Worship. In particular, this amendment would relate to the purchase of bulk water from the Capital Regional District for resale as retail water to our customers. So it's about $300,000 per month or so to purchase that bulk water. Similarly, we've also entered into agreement with the CRD for sewer conveyance services, which is normally a taxation, but we've converted it to an invoice pursuant to that agreement. And so one could consider that a supply as service under our purchasing policy. So this just clarifies that we can continue to purchase sewer conveyance without going to council for approval every time we do that. And then other examples in terms of statutory monopolies would be not necessarily in our case, but telecom or hydro authority type of monopolies.
Thank you, Mr. Payne, for that clarification. Although you make me wonder now if we should test the market for sewer conveyance. There might be some low-cost sellers out there. Sorry, bad joke. Is there any other questions of staff on this one? Mr. Payne, I just had a question on this. I note on there that the mayor's signature may be applied electronically up to a certain amount. I'm assuming that the mayor's signature can't be applied electronically without approval of the mayor attached to that.
Your Worship, this policy would basically embed approval of the mayor. Right now, we have checks that automatically print electronic signatures, depending on the value of that check for both the CFO and the mayor. And once it exceeds those values, then the mayor is asked to sign manually, or the CAO or corporate officer is asked to sign manually.
Okay, thank you for that clarification. Any other questions? I don't see any other questions here. So again, procedurally here, I'm going back to the public to see if there's any hands raised that wish to speak. I am seeing none on my screen, and I'm getting the official head shake from staff in the room here that there are none. So with that, I'm going to just move to the report being received.
Move to receive.
Moved and seconded. Thank you. Any discussion? All those in favor? Any opposed? None opposed. That carries. And then we have the, we'll just move through these. The amended procurement policy be adopted. Moved and seconded. Thank you.
Adoption.
Any just further discussion on that policy? Seeing none. All those in favor? Any opposed? None opposed. And then we need the delegated authority bylaw be given first and second reading.
I'll move that the delegated authority of the administrative functions bylaw amendment bylaw number 4820/2022 be given first and second reading.
Moved and seconded. Thank you. So any discussion now on the bylaw changes in front of us? I don't see any, so I will call the question. All those in favor? Any opposed? None opposed. And then we can do the honors for third reading.
Move third reading.
Moved and seconded. Thank you. Any further discussion? Don't see any. All those in favor? Any opposed? None opposed. That carries. So thank you very much for that, Mr. Payne. We move on to item number 10.4, which concludes the end of our public input portion. So again, if you wish to speak to item number 10.4, which is the council remuneration 2022, please raise your hand at this time following the instructions on the screen, or if you're within our Zoom application, you can hit the reactions tab and raise hand. With that, Ms. Williams, the report is yours. We'd like to give a brief overview of the report in front of us.
Thank you, Your Worship. Very briefly, on June 13th, Council considered options to increase the council remuneration to become effective with the new council that will be coming in on November the 7th. At that time, staff was directed to prepare a bylaw based on the average compensation for the municipalities within the Capital Regional District. The information in the previous report was based on 2021 numbers. So as promised, we've updated the table. It's included in the report before you with the actual 2022 wages for the positions throughout the region this year, with the exception of Colwood, which is still outstanding. So the information is here before you. The bylaw has been drafted based on the average of the municipalities within the Capital Regional District and is presented for 3 readings tonight. I should mention the other ask on June 13th was that a policy be drafted and brought back to guide future reviews, and we are working on that in the time and hope to have it back to you for in September.
Thank you very much, Ms. Williams. Are there any questions of Ms. Williams? Go ahead, Councillor Appleton.
Thank you, Your Worship. So, through you to Ms. Williams, just to clarify the point that was just made, by receiving the report and the recommendations associated, then the policy review we don't need a separate motion for the policy piece.
Just for clarification, Ms. Williams, do you mind speaking aloud since we don't have people in the room? Can you just answer?
That is correct, Your Worship. It's just here tonight to receive the report and to give the bylaw readings. The policy piece will come later.
All right, thank you. Are there any other questions here from council? I guess my question is, I looked at this and the original discussion that we had around the table, and I granted it was sort of general, and we used the average as a guide to get to the number, was that we were looking for a number sort of in that 21 to 22,000 for a councillor last time, and I just I wondered, given that this is now that we have the actual numbers for 2022, that number is notably higher than that. If and I'll just throw it out there as a question because I'm not going to make the motion myself, but I think it warrants some consideration. Just given that, if maybe we set this original rate at say 10% below the average, which is still well above the median rate, but would put it, just for your information, I did the numbers, it would put at 21,340 as the rate for councillors, to give some comparison. I just think that might have some merit there, and it takes some of the overweighting of Saanich and Victoria out of the equation, and gets us closer to the numbers that we were talking about at the last meeting. That being said, I will say that the average is simple and gives a clear number on that. So at the end of the day, that would be a decision for council to make. Go ahead, Councillor Braithwaite.
I can see the logic behind that, and it does seem to me that it's a big jump to go from where we are right now to the 23,700. I'm not saying that we're not worth that, or the next council wouldn't be worth that, but it is quite a big jump, and I think I take your point on if you remove the Victoria and the Saanich salaries out of there, because they are quite a bit higher than the other municipalities. So I mean, I'm comfortable with taking it down 10%.
I don't know if there's any other discussion from members of council here tonight. Go ahead, Councillor Green.
Yes, thank you. And I was the one who made the motion at the last meeting, as you know. I really feel that was based on older numbers, as we've noted. And I know this is a very sensitive issue, but I think we should be very clear. This does not apply to this council or to any of us. But this is a correction that has been essentially outstanding since 1989, with the exception of cost of living increases. And we were one of the lowest in the province for a long time. I really think it's a value statement about how much our community values the work we do. And I quite frankly, I've had no phone calls or anyone complaining about this lift in the stipend, not one person. And in fact, we had one caller at the last meeting call in to support this. And so I'm confident that the community will understand that this is fair and reasonable. And I really feel that it will enable a more diverse council. It will encourage single parents, younger people. We will have hopefully new faces and voices around the table subsequently. And given the difficulty we face in the future, and the more complex this work becomes, I don't think this is untoward. And I really, I would support the current number, but I will let others speak. Thank you.
Well, we have the process here is just, we have their suggestions here. If there's a motion to change it, we'll deal with that. Otherwise, we'll deal with the piece in front of us. I just raised it as a point, just because at the end of the day, we were talking about some numbers and we used the average because it got us to those numbers, and I just thought it'd be worth flagging. So I'll look if there's any, at the end of the day, we have to get to a motion, but we're not going to go to a motion just yet because I do want to give the opportunity for any members of the public to speak to us on this matter before we go to any motions. Not seeing any, getting official head shakes, which is always good or bad, depending on your outlook. So no members of the public speaking to us on this matter. I'll deal with first just a procedural, if we can just get a motion to receive the report, moved and seconded. Any discussion on the receipt? All those in favor? Any opposed? None opposed. Why don't we manage this procedurally? Bylaws in general are best dealt with through reading of the first and second reading and then dealing with amendments at the second reading. And then we would move third reading as amended if there's any will to do so. So why don't we take the motion as is for first and second reading?
Your Worship, I would move that council remuneration bylaw number 4822, 2022 be given first and second readings.
Moved, and is there a seconder? Moved, I saw a hand up on screen. Thank you, Councillor Green. Moved and seconded, thank you. So this is a chance for discussion. Anything further on this? Changes to the pieces, nothing, okay. Not seeing any, I'm gonna call the question then. All those in favor? Any opposed? None opposed, that carries. And then we have, just looking for third reading.
Your Worship, I would move that council remuneration bylaw number 4822, 2022 be given third reading.
Moved and
Second.
seconded, thank you. Any other discussion on the matter? We don't usually do that on third reading, so I'll call the question. All those in favor? Any opposed? None opposed. That'll come back next week for adoption. And then we have new business. I don't have any notification of new business. Looking around the table, we have a notice of motion now. Councillor Patterson, I understand Councillor Zelka asked you to move this if you wish. If you don't wish to, we can just refer it to the next meeting and deal with it at that meeting if that's your will.
I am happy to move the motion, and that partly is because of discussions that we had at the last APC meeting. And at that, we have it on the screen so everybody can read the entire motion. So do you want me to read it all?
I think we should read it into the record. Not okay. There's no whereas clauses, but just the motion itself.
Okay. And therefore, be it resolved that staff proceed with the following policy direction for implementing secondary suites in Oak Bay, that short-term rental use known as traveler accommodation use be not permitted within a principal building for RS zones.
Moved and seconded. Thank you. Councillor Patterson, do you wish to speak further? You indicated you wished to add something from the Advisory Planning Commission comments you wanted to reflect.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. And it did come up briefly at the last Advisory Planning Commission meeting when they were receiving the presentation of infill housing, and members of the commission did note that short-term rental accommodation puts extra pressure on both the availability and the affordability of accommodation within this district and perhaps within the greater region. And so the question that, of course, they put to me was that what our policies were with regard to short-term rental, and of course we don't permit short-term rental, but we have nothing to prevent it. And so this is something that I think that is worthy of discussion and consideration, particularly if we are trying to achieve maximum availability of housing within this district and within the region. I don't know that it will provide greater affordability for permanent housing within the district. However, it will prevent those who speculate on using short-term rental units for greater income certainty will not have that available to them. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Patterson. Seconder, did you wish to add anything? I'm just going to point out, I don't, just in the interest of managing meeting time on this one, I'm just going to point out that on June 13th, the motion was that staff provide options to prohibit short-term rental use in secondary suites and boarding uses in the RS zone. This is essentially a duplicate of that motion. It doesn't say options, but no matter what we do here, we can't dictate on how we'll have to have staff come back with options. We can implement this any number of ways. So I was actually going to rule this as sort of, sort of out of order in the sense that it's essentially a replica. So I don't think we need to replicate. We've already given a motion in this direction. If this passes or it doesn't pass, it doesn't change things significantly, but it may be things. But I'm going to, before I go to you, Councillor Green, I'll go to you, Ms. Williams. Anything else you wish to add?
Thank you, Your Worship. Yes, just to clarify, the previous motion addressed short-term rental use, vacation accommodation in secondary suites and boarding uses. This one is addressing the same uses in the principal building. So while it does nullify, in one sense, the previous motion, but it expands it to include the principal dwelling in the principal building as well. So it does expand the prohibition.
Thank you. And I guess, so then the question on that one would be, is it separate enough that the options provided to you, which is to guide a secondary suite, which is coming in the short term, can be done, or does this supersede it and stop that process and suddenly turn this into a much larger project? Like, can we still move forward quickly with the restrictions on suites and borders and deal with the bigger question as this motion as a separate item going forward, Ms. Williams?
Thank you, Your Worship. And yes, to the latter, we can continue with the secondary suites regulations that are currently drafted and ready to come to council, and then we can tweak them as needed once we get the go-ahead from council to consider a more broad prohibition on the principal dwelling.
Thank you for that clarification. Go ahead, Councillor Green.
No, that's fine. Thank you. I was waiting to hear that discussion for clarification. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Go ahead, Councillor Appleton.
Thank you, Your Worship. So just to be clear, what I'm hearing Ms. Williams say is that there would be an analysis provided and a decision point for council. The motion as presented here essentially says for staff to proceed to implement basically a prohibition. So there's nothing in the motion on the floor that specifically directs staff to provide an analysis, but and a decision point, future decision point for council. But I think that's what I heard. So can I just get that confirmed?
Yes, thank you, Councillor Appleton. No, I may just ask that if that's for clarification, Ms. Williams, should we adapt a little bit of language here so that we're a little bit clearer in terms of what to the public doesn't see this as an immediate. I mean, we don't. Councillor Patterson correctly pointed out, we don't allow short-term rentals. They're banned both by the building licensing piece, which doesn't allow for those businesses. It also is restricted under a very convoluted bylaw that sort of outlines the amount of days and so forth a vacation can be used. But Ms. Williams, I'll pass the question over to you.
Thank you, Your Worship. Staff are unable to implement any policy, of course, outside of a bylaw. So what we'll come back to council will be draft regulations to prohibit the use in the principal dwelling, but there will be a cover report there just explaining the implications of that. As we dig further into this, there are unknowns in our own zoning bylaw that will come to light as we start to do that research. So it will come back with an analysis of here's what you've asked for and here's the impact and the implications of it. And a draft bylaw will be there if council wishes to proceed. Just to give you an example, as we consider infill housing, certain types of infill housing would not be captured in this resolution. So we just want to bring you back a very fulsome report that really explains this is what you've asked for, here's how we can implement it, and here are some implications or perhaps some unintended positives or consequences.
Thank you for that. It's not entirely clear, but we'll take it. I want to make sure we're absolutely clear on this one, though. There's the existing resolution, which is dealing with borders and the suites themselves, and that's essentially being worked on currently. And then, as in time, we'll get to the issue of principal building. But it's still, this motion does refer to suites, so it's still within the principal building. I just want to make sure we're clear on the sort of the timeline expectations on this, Ms. Williams.
Yes, Your Worship, thank you. The secondary suites regulations, as I mentioned, are drafted. So those are going to be coming to council next week, I believe, for consideration of readings. This, of course, is not even on the work plan at this point. So staff will give you an idea once we get our new Director of Community Building and Planning in, give you an idea of when this kind of research and review and regulations can be drafted.
Okay, thank you for that. Go ahead, Councillor Patterson.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. And again, the discussion was that our existing position is that we do not permit short-term rentals in the district. So it's a passive. We don't permit them. Moving to an active, that they are not permitted, in fact. So it is more concise, really, I think, on the intent. And I think that's where the clarity is so that we actually are actively seeking to not permit them.
Thank you. I guess my other question on this one is, does it need to have principal building wording in there, or are we really just looking at, because if there's outbuildings and those other aspects that we're considering, does that actually, if we're just looking at a broader statement here, is that something that we're actually, does this actually capture that? But again, this gives some direction, and we'll have a staff report coming back with it. But Councillor Appleton, you wish to add something?
Thank you, Your Worship. I was just, and I understand, I also was a little bit confused about the sort of the genesis of this and its attachment to secondary suites. So I'm wondering whether an amendment to the motion on the floor might be suitable. Just striking the language from the motion, essentially that says for implementing secondary suites in Oak Bay, essentially reducing it down to say staff proceed with the following policy direction. That's short-term rental use known as traveler accommodation use not be permitted within principal buildings. So it no longer references secondary suites, which I think might produce clarity for this direction, seeing as how secondary suites, as Ms. Williams has described, is being dealt with separately. Just for clarity's sake.
Before I seek a second, or if that's a motion, Councillor Appleton, I'm just going to go to staff to see if does that help or hinder the the direction given here, because it seems like we're talking about this more broadly. It's both speaking to suites, but also to the principal building, and all principal buildings in our zones, if the bylaw passes, will include the option for suites. So it's maybe redundant language. Ms. Williams, your thoughts on this?
Thank you, Your Worship. I'm just turning my mind to the timing. The secondary suites bylaws have been drafted and legally reviewed. If you want to leave it with staff, I would leave the wording in there, and we can check in with staff. And if there's an option to amend the existing bylaws fairly quickly to not reference secondary suites and boarding uses, but rather principal buildings generally, without slowing that process down, we'll do it. Otherwise, we may proceed with what we've already legally vetted, bring it to council, and when this other project is underway, we'll tweak the existing, or the language that will be existing at that time.
Sir Appleton, is that a reasonable approach?
As long as, it sounds to me like staff are clear on what the objective is, Your Worship, and I appreciate your wanting to clarify on it. So I think I understand the objective here, and staff appears to understand the objective. But so if that's adequate, then that's fine with me.
I think the important piece here is that we don't stop the bylaws from coming for consideration first and second reading, so we can get to them and have some of this conversation on the bylaws themselves, as opposed to sort of the abstract. Councillor Patterson?
Thank you, Mayor. And if I might just add in that when the secondary suites then come back for vetting at the council table, there may be those around the council table that if short-term rental use is not more actively discouraged through not allowing it permitted within the RS zone, there may be then less uptake for the acceptance of secondary suites if it was perceived that they could still be used as short-term rentals. So I think this will hopefully bring some certainty back when we look at secondary suites and other forms of infill housing.
Thank you. Thank you, Councillor Patterson. I think that is a point. I'm just going to point out again, the motion that was being given already is that in the bylaws that are coming forward, provide to prohibit short-term rental use in secondary suites and boarding use. So that word prohibit is actually in the motion and as part of that bylaw piece. So I don't think adding language that says not permitted make it stronger than prohibited. I think it just changes it from the use into the building. And so if staff can accommodate that for the next meeting, that would be ideal. If this passes, and if they can't, then we'll deal with that as a secondary piece. I think I'm clear now on the process that'll go forward. Any other discussion on the motion that's in front of us? Don't see any, so I'll call the question. All those in favor? Any opposed? None opposed? Thank you. I just want to make sure for clarification for anybody watching, despite this motion being labeled as such and not sort of bring back options, it does always require that these options come back in forms of a bylaw and a report. So we'll have that piece coming back for council for information. So with that, any other things arising from that? Not seeing any. We just need a motion to adjourn. Moved and seconded. Any other discussion? All those in favor? Any opposed? None opposed. It is 7.